You hear about it all the time, the US national debt. It's this number that gets thrown around that's just so big, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. It feels totally abstract. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to dive in and try to make sense of one of the biggest, most mind-boggling numbers on the planet. Okay, look at this. $30 trillion. Let that sink in. That's a 3 followed by 13 zeros. It's a number so huge it honestly doesn't even feel real, does it? It's the kind of number that just makes you pause and ask a very, very simple question.
Right. How on earth did we get here? And that is exactly the question we're going to unpack in this explainer. We're going to follow the breadcrumbs, starting with the absolute basics of how a government budget works, all the way to this gigantic figure. All right, first things first. To really get a handle on this massive number, we've got to go back to square one. How does a government even get into debt to begin with? It's actually a lot more straightforward than you might think. Okay, so just think about your own budget at home, right? You've got money coming in, your income, and money going out, your expenses. It's the same basic idea for a government. Their income is mostly tax revenue, and their expenses, well, as you can imagine, they're just a little bit bigger. And when the government spends more in a year than it brings in from taxes, boom, you've got a deficit for that year. So what are they spending all this money on? We're talking about the huge, fundamental things that make a country run. We're talking about national defense, building and maintaining our roads and bridges, things like Medicare and Social Security for healthcare, disaster relief when things go wrong, and, stepping in with economic support during a crisis. And yeah, every single one of those comes with a very hefty price tag. Okay. So, when you have that deficit, that gap between spending and income, the government has to find cash to fill it. And the way it does that is by issuing what are called government bonds. Now, investors, and this can be anybody, you, me, huge pension funds, even other countries, they buy these bonds. What they're really doing is just lending money to the government. The government gets the cash now to pay its bills, and the investor gets a promise to be paid back later with interest. The national debt, that's just the grand total of all of these borrowings, all those yearly deficits piled up over many, many years. And as you can see here, this isn't a new thing. This cycle has been repeating for decades. And every time a major event hits, we're talking wars, the financial crisis back in 2008, major tax cuts, and of course the huge spending during the COVID pandemic, each one of those events meant the government had to borrow trillions more, adding another massive layer to that growing pile of debt. So this naturally brings up one of the biggest questions people have about the debt, and honestly, one of the biggest myths. Who in the world do we owe all this money to? You might be surprised by the answer. I'm sure you've heard this a million times, right? The common story is that the US owes most of its debt to other countries, and you always hear China's name come up. It's a really powerful narrative, but it's just not the whole story, not even close. Okay. So take a look at this. This chart really flips that whole idea on its head. Yeah, foreign owners hold some of the debt. You can see that slice there. But look at the giant piece of the pie. The vast majority is actually owned right here at home. We're talking about American investors, the pension funds that hold our retirement savings, regular old US banks, and even another part of the government, the Federal Reserve. So here's the bottom line, the big takeaway. When we talk about who owns the US debt, for the most part, the government owes that money to its own citizens and its own institutions. It's an internal IOU, in a way. All right, but that still leaves a huge question hanging in the air, right? If the number is so incredibly high, why hasn't everything just collapsed? How can the system keep going? Well, the answer comes down to a kind of financial superpower that the US dollar has. And that superpower has a name. It's the world's reserve currency. So what does that mean? It basically just means it's the default currency for the whole planet. It's what other countries' central banks hold in their savings accounts, and it's the currency used for most international business. And being the world's go-to currency is a huge deal. Think about it. Global trade, like buying and selling oil, it's all done in dollars. That creates this constant, massive demand for US dollars all over the world. And because of that stability, US government bonds are considered one of the safest places on earth to park your money. That means there's pretty much always a long line of people and countries ready and willing to lend the US government money. So all of this trust, this global demand, it puts the US in a really unique position. It can keep borrowing new money to pay back the old money it borrowed before. It's kind of like refinancing your debt over and over again, but on a global scale and with an ease that pretty much no other country has. Of course, the whole system really depends on that global trust staying rock solid.
Okay, so we've been talking about some really big, abstract ideas. Trillions of dollars, global reserve currencies. But what does any of this actually mean for you, for your wallet? Let's bring it back home. Yeah, the first thing to get is that the debt probably isn't going to cause some big, dramatic, overnight collapse. It's not an immediate crisis like that. It's much more of a slow burn, a structural challenge. A good way to think about it is it's less like a sudden heart attack and more like a long-term health problem that just slowly, year after year, limits what you're able to do. And this chart shows exactly where that long-term problem starts to really bite. Just like any loan, the government has to pay interest on its debt. And as the debt gets bigger, the interest payments get bigger. And look, that interest payment is becoming a huge slice of the entire budget. Every dollar spent on interest is a dollar that can't be spent on something else, whether that's funding medical research, fixing roads, improving schools, you name it. It crowds out other priorities. And believe me, that trickles down to your wallet. The huge amount of government borrowing can affect the interest rates you pay on your mortgage or a car loan. It can be a factor in driving up inflation, meaning your money just doesn't go as far. And here's a big one. It ties the government's hands, leaving it with less room to act when the next big crisis comes along. So yeah, it absolutely has an impact on jobs, prices, and your savings. So what's the solution? Well, this is where it gets really tough. There are no easy, painless answers. It's basically a menu of very difficult choices, and each one has a major downside. You could cut government spending, but that could mean cutting back on important programs people rely on. You could raise taxes, but that might slow down the whole economy. Or you could even try to inflate the debt away, but that just makes everything more expensive for all of us. As you can see, there's no magic wand here. And that's really what it all comes down to. This $30 trillion number, it isn't just an economic statistic. It's a giant flashing sign about the trade-offs we're making. It might not be a 5-alarm fire for us today, but it is, without a doubt, a choice that will define our tomorrow. And it leaves us with a really big and kind of heavy question to think about. What kind of future are we borrowing from?